Hello, this is Russell Moore, and this is the audio version of the weekly More to the Point newsletter, which you can get in your inbox for free every Wednesday by just signing up with your email address in the link provided in the show notes. This week, I want to talk about pretending. American Christian social media lit up last week with the story of yet another fraudulent influencer. An account claiming to be run by a patriarchy supporting trad wife with 14 children turned out to be that of a single childless woman with a fake identity and a falsely narrated life. Now, this case was an especially literal example of a broader truth that really ought to be a warning in this age of ideological extremism. You become who you pretend to be, but in one direction only. What I mean by that is you can fake your way to vice, but you can never fake your way to virtue. The evolutionary biologist Hanno Sauer has written a book, The Invention of Good and Evil, that seems designed to elicit eye rolls from me from the title on, because the assumption is that good and evil are in fact invented. It's the reductionist materialist perspective that morality and immorality, good and evil, they don't really reflect anything transcendent about reality, but instead show how humans have evolved to cooperate for the flourishing of the gene pool. Now, Sauer's analysis is more interesting when he gets to a sociological examination of the last 50 years or so. He wonders how, in this cultural moment, people navigate what's right and wrong. Among other things, he points to the role of pretense. After a long discussion of broadening views of human rights, including what some refer to as the wokeness wars of the past several years, Sauer looks at the global right-wing backlash, especially as mediated through social media. There he describes a pattern of irony leading to reality that I've seen play itself out in 1,000 tragic stories. He asks, first of all, why so many have embraced what would be seen in almost any other age as cruelty of a cartoonish sort. Some of this, he argues, is the desperate search for something against which to rebel. Quote, in the case of many adolescents, what's left to rebel against when your former hippie parents don't have a problem with drugs and premarital sex? Not infrequently, this next step has consisted of swastikas, crude misogyny, and confessions of murder fantasies, end quote. Now, at first, he argues that a lot of this rebellion is played for laughs. Quote, which aspects of the right-wing backlash were really meant seriously and which were simply provocation, whether the ends eventually justified almost every means. Well, Sauer says most of it in the beginning is the latter. They only, quote, meant it ironically or precisely meta-ironically, the irony being to leave it unclear what was really meant ironically and what was not, end quote. Human psychology, however, does not allow the heart to keep this kind of vice signaling at the level of trolling. Quote, unfortunately, some people who had been in on the joke forgot that you have to be careful who you pretend to be, because at some point you become who you pretend to be, Sauer says. Quote, many, once they'd shed their ironic pose, became real Nazis or real misogynists, and often both, end quote. This is especially true, he argues, in a time of what he calls extremism inflation, driven by the attention economy. If you've wondered why much of what you see in online Christianity seems to be a direct inversion of the qualifications of the Christian elder as temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not given to drunkenness, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money, 1 Timothy 3, 2 through 3, well, you're not the crazy one. Sauer writes, quote, almost every social grouping, both right and left wing, has to struggle with the problem of extremism inflation, particularly as those few extremists end up dominating discourse. A group's ideology inevitably ends up being dominated by the people who represent the most extreme version of that ideology, and beyond a certain point, this extreme version eventually becomes the new normal, end quote. He continues, anyone who wants to join the group or move up within it must be able to demonstrate a particular loyalty to the cause, and that usually means escalating this radicalization loop even more. From there, it's only a small step to proclaiming that Kim Jong-un can teleport or that the Fuhrer is infallible. Vanishingly few actually believe this nonsense, or indeed that anyone else believes it. But ideological extremism becomes a costly signal, as it is designed to build trust within groups by burning bridges with common sense and with others, and further consolidating the group's bonds, end quote. In this way, the vapid advice that's often given to people to fake it until you make it is actually kind of true. Pretending to be extreme will eventually make the typical person into an extremist. Pretending to see compassion as toxic or fidelity as weakness will eventually lead to an inner life of cruelty and coarseness that matches the outer show. Now, that's because the hunger for the pretense is itself already a loss of integrity. Those who mimic the ways of an idol, the Bible says, do in fact become like that idol over time. Psalm 115:8. For this reason, the Apostle Paul warns about unconfronted immorality under the cover of church membership. Do you not know, he writes to the church at Corinth, that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? 1 Corinthians 5:6. What's normalized is imitated, and immorality that is imitated ultimately becomes real. It doesn't work the other way around, though. You can pretend your way to vice, but not to virtue. You can wink with irony on your way to hell, but there's no return ticket. That's because integrity and morality and godliness do not come about by outward demonstration. Whitewashing the tomb does nothing to enliven the decomposing corpses underneath, to use Jesus's very vivid imagery in Matthew 23:27-29. Having the appearance of godliness but denying its power, as Paul calls it in 2 Timothy 3:5, is not the first step to real godliness. It's instead the contradiction and desecration of real godliness. The way to immorality starts with building one's way up, and you can fake your way to a foothold on that climb. But the way of Christ is different. It starts with a recognition of lack, of the kind of empty-handedness that puts away falsehood. Ephesians 4:25. Pretend to be a Nazi long enough, and you will soon find yourself goose-stepping along with the best of them. Lap at sexual abuse and human trafficking long enough, and you will become a predator. Those who wink and nod with "aren't we naughty" trolls, thinking they can do so without ever becoming what they pretend to be, enact a sad irony. They seem to think that they can create a Christian nation only if the state is coercive enough to make people pretend to be Christians until they are. But the exact opposite is true. You cannot pretend your way to a changed heart or a renewed mind, much less to Christian maturity. The Spirit doesn't work that way. Jesus will ask you what he asks of everyone. What are you seeking? John 1:38. But you will not enter the kingdom of God without a congruence between the heart and the mouth. Admittance to the kingdom is through mercy and grace alone, which come only to those who have given up on earning and achieving. Romans 10:9-11. Millennia ago, the Bible warned us of all of this. The aim of our charge is love that issues from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith, Paul wrote to Timothy. Certain persons, by swerving from these, have wandered away into vain discussion, desiring to be teachers of the law without understanding either what they are saying or the things about which they make confident assertions. 1 Peter 1:5-7. Be careful what you pretend to be. Pretending your way to hell will take you there, and pretending your way to heaven will take you to hell too. A sincere faith, a good conscience. These things are not good for clout in a time of extremism inflation. But ask yourself, is that what you really want? This has been the audio version of the More to the Point newsletter. You can sign up to get this in your email inbox every Wednesday by clicking on the link in the show notes. We will see you next time. This is Russell Moore.